Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Jenin and here with my co-host Melissa Whitty, and we're joined by a wonderful guest today, Khalil Sayegh. He is the CEO of Agora, which is an initiative to broker peace between Israel and Palestine. He's actually from Gaza, so he has an extremely interesting story that I think everyone will be excited to hear. But first, Mel's just going to do her thing quickly.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in again, and thank you so much for all your comments yet again on your campaign finance stuff. I promise we're going to have lots more on that. And then Janina and I are actually going to do a live where I'm going to walk her through how to do campaign finance research so that everybody can see exactly how it's done and you guys can ask your questions and whatnot. So we're planning that sometime next week, and make sure you tune in. And to do that, you need to hit the like, hit the subscribe, and maybe even hit the notifications button. That would be awesome too. So thank you so much. And thank you so much, Khalil, for joining us. We're so excited to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
So can you start by telling us a little bit about your background, your family, where you grew up, and how you came to the United States?
Yes, absolutely. I was born and raised to a small Palestinian Christian family in Gaza. I worshipped at the church that was built in the 3rd century. Our community has been in the Gaza Strip really since the 3rd century, the Church of St. Porphyrius. A lot of you have probably heard of it when the infamous bombing by Israeli Air Force in October 19th of 2023. But my family heritage really my family heritage really goes back to 1948, to a city that used to be known as Majdal. Majdal is a city in the southern part of historical Palestine, today within the boundaries of what's known as the State of Israel, that was completely ethnic cleansed and destroyed in 1948. And the city that actually exists upon the ruins of Majdal today is an Israeli Jewish city known as Ashkelon. So my family was pushed back from Ashkelon to Gaza. And my grandpa, who was always working in jewelries, have lost both of his shops in Ramle, within the boundaries of Israel, and in Majdal, known as Ashkelon today. And he started over from zero
And sorry to interrupt,
Gaza.
but your family was not compensated in any way, right? So the property was taken by force, and then they were not given anything for it, right?
So that's the interesting part, right? They were all pushed out. Churches were destroyed. Shops were destroyed, homes were destroyed, and then, even the U.S. administration back then have called for Israel to allow refugees back because the war had ended, peace has prevailed, and there is armistice lines that were drawn between Arab states and the State of Israel. And the U.S. position and the UN position was let refugees back. Israel refused, and not only refused, but anyone who dared to try to cross these really fictional lines that were drawn, such as around Gaza, will be shot and killed by the Israeli forces. And then following that, in 1952, Israel passed what's known as the absent property law. What is the absent property law? It's a law that states that that who is not in Israel after 1948, his property is confiscated and belongs to the state, and was given to new Jewish immigrants who were there. So my grandma, for example, who owned a really big house in Majdal, a big chunk of land, and 2 jewelry shops, all of that was lost, and we weren't compensated in any way.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of hard for us to imagine because we have, obviously the concept of eminent domain in the U.S. So you can take, the state can take the land and they can even take your property. But of course you have to be compensated for it. Right. And so I personally think, it's worth remembering if this happened to your family. I mean, you're probably going to hold a grudge against the government that did it to you, right? That did it to them. I mean, I think that that's just human nature. And I think it's kind of ridiculous the way that some people seem to expect Palestinians to just not respond in the way that we would all respond if that happened to us.
Yeah, and the issue is that this is away from being just like one story, right? That this is 80% of the population of historical Palestine, that their property was really stolen from them, pushed out, and not allowed back. That's the story really of the majority of the Christian community too. I mean, again, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict usually is being portrayed in the US as the Muslim-Jewish conflict, right? But the fact is, before 48, the Palestinian Christians have made about like between 18 to 25% of the population, majority of whom have been pushed up to Lebanon or to Jordan or to Gaza and the West Bank. So that's also another element. It's actually a little anecdote that a lot of Americans don't know. There's something called the Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. It's a Christian Zionist organization that's based in Jerusalem. The house that they have the embassy on is literally a stolen house that belonged to a Christian family. Actually, it belongs to the grandpa of Edward Said, the famous Palestinian critic.
I
So
was going to say
imagine,
I heard this story because I was listening to
yeah.
Saeed's daughter.
So
Yeah.
this is the house that is belonged to a Christian family, stole by a Christian family, and then made to a Christian embassy for Christian Zionists. Another anecdote similar to that: the villa that Netanyahu is living in, the Prime Minister villa in West Jerusalem, where he lives, belongs to a Christian family as well. One of the aristocrats that lived there, literally, the villa that the Prime Minister of Israel lives in is a property that belonged to a Christian family, and they were stripped from it. None of them were confiscated. None of them was even recognized that that this is their right and their land were taken about. And again, all of that is well documented history, not even a Palestinian oral history. It's a well documented history by Israeli historians themselves.
A lot of Americans think that Muslims treat Christians in the Middle East badly, and I'm not asking for an overview or 2,000-year history. We don't have time for that, obviously. But in your experience, what's sort of the relationship between Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims, in a general sense?
I would say it's hard to just explain it very, very simply.
Yeah.
I'd say overall it's a positive experience. There are certain incidents of difficulties, and I always describe it it's as if you're like a Muslim kid or Jewish kid and you grow up in the South here in America, there is chances that you'll experience some unpleasant things because you're the unknown and you're a minority and the majority are Christians, and there is likelihood to experience unpleasant things. So that has been my experience in Gaza. I've really had, experiences because I was the only Christian at school, for example, and I had
Oh, wow.
difficulties with kids sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't by any means systematic at all. And still today, it's
Yeah.
not really systematic in any means. But I think the difference that happened after 2007, when Hamas took over in Gaza, it's still Hamas didn't persecute Christians systematically. But what happened is Hamas has turned the public square to an Islamic public square, meaning the religion in public became Islam for real. While in the West Bank, where the Palestinian nationalists are still ruling, like the Palestinian Authority, that's not the case. Christians, for example, in Ramallah, can have Christmas tree in public, and Muslims even celebrate Christmas. It's actually a national holiday. In Israel, it's not. In Palestine, it is national holiday. So is Easter. In Gaza, Hamas canceled these, and Hamas Islamized the public square. Now that we can't say that that's a case of persecution, but it definitely made Christians feel uncomfortable, and it definitely increased the harassment from the public radicals, especially those who belong to Hamas movement, because they adhere to a certain Islamist theology that require them to always Islamize the society. And the easiest and most vulnerable target have become Christians, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's interesting. So when did your family leave Gaza?
Actually, my family did not leave Gaza. I left by
Okay.
myself in
Oh.
2010, and I left when I was 15. After the
Mm.
war in 2009, 2008, 2009, it stayed 45 days, among which it was the New Year's Eve. I was in Gaza, and I've witnessed with my own eyes while I was at UNRWA school. 200 Palestinian policemen during their graduation, they all died with one missile. My schoolroom became all smoky. I was terrified. I ran with all the classmates
Wow.
outside, and I had to navigate really walking through bodies of people who were killed in the street. It was
Wow.
such a traumatizing experience.
Yeah.
And this siege on Gaza, coupled with the occupation and Hamas authoritarianism in Gaza, etc., has pushed me to leave. And to leave Gaza was an impossible task for anyone. I was among the lucky ones to get what's so-called Easter permit, which is a permit Israel gives you for a week if you're Christian, to go visit the holy sites in Jerusalem and the West Bank and come back. And they give half of the family always to make sure that families can't move out. So they give half of our family. I received the permit. I was 15, and I told my parents there's no way I would go back to this hell in Gaza. So I moved to Ramallah. And since then, I lived in Ramallah. And 21, I moved here for grad school in Washington and stay. But the tragedy is that during this war, as I said, our house was bombed in Gaza. Our jewelry shop was bombed. Everything we have been bombed. But not only that, I also lost my father, and who was killed, and my youngest sister. In April 23, I lost my sister, and in December 23, I lost my father, both of whom were killed due to Israeli intentional prevention of medical care for them.
I'm so sorry. Did you mean that your sister was killed in April of 24 or 23?
24. Did I say 23?
Yeah, but
Yeah, that's
just to clarify that it was after October 7th.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Wow,
We're so
I know.
so sorry.
And your mother is still in Gaza?
So my mom made it with my brother to Cairo
Okay.
after this incident. We were lucky to get her in before the border closed, and we had to pay a very high fee, as you probably heard. But my older sister and her, my nephews and husband are still in Gaza, sheltered at the St. Porphyrius Church, which was bombed on October 19th. And my family was there when the church was bombed, and I lost friends there, and I lost like a friend of mine lost his three babies. All his babies were killed, and only him and his wife survived the bombing.
How do you stay so calm after going through this? You're so calm. I would be so angry.
The truth is, I am angry. The truth is, I am outraged. I'm not. There is no words to describe the horror. But I think that, I mean, there are two things that give me calm, and that sounds brutal. One, that I've went through a lot already. I mean, I'm someone who seen this stuff up close, even before I lose my family. Always, although nothing like losing a family, right? It's like it's different when you see friends dying in front of your eyes, but when your family are killed and you're away, it cuts deep to the heart. And the other thing, it's the faith, right? Like I do believe that the crucifixion and a resurrection of Christ offers something different than anywhere else. I mean, I know that he was raised indeed, and that brings certain element of hope that is different. So that's in sort of philosophical or psychological level, right? On the practical level, there is no way to really bring about change unless you're calm and you know what you want and how you move it. I don't think that the moral outrage and moralizing the issue generally would help us. Obviously, what Israel is doing is, from my point of view, is a genocide. It's very obvious. There are intentional killing of civilians. There is an apartheid system that has been imposed on the Palestinians for so long. But if I take all of that and just go and scream and start cussing or whatever, I don't think it will help me. I think I would just like feel maybe better about myself, but I wouldn't be able to convince the public. I wouldn't be able to make my cause rationally. And my view is that, like, despite the pain, and again, it's not easy. I'm not like blaming those who are in pain, right? Like, if someone went through what I went through and he's very angry, I would just probably just give them a hug and just say, like, I feel you, right? But people who are more or less considered the elite, right? I don't know if I'm an elitist, but maybe perhaps I am because I came to an elitist school in the US. I graduated from here, so I have certain privilege others don't. I speak the language that I can really communicate to the world what happened to my friends and family. I think we have responsibility to be as calm as possible, and yes, feel the anger and express it to communicate the message. Because at the end of the day, it's our duty to break down the story as simple as possible to the American public.
What can you tell us a little about the Agora initiative and what you're doing in this area?
Yeah, it's an organization that I founded ironically in August 23, just 2 months before October 7th, and it was with an Israeli partner of mine, Elazar Wise. He's a doctorate student at Yale studying law, and my training was in political science and theology. We met at Yale. I was giving a talk there, and then we met. And it was during a time when the two-state solution seemed impossible. Israel was going through a crisis with its the whole judicial reform, and there were all these talks about what the future of Israel looks like. And we felt that one of the missing parts of the conversation was the occupation, the fact that the occupation continues. And we both were having a really deep conversation about constitutional democracy. What does this look like, or could look like in the future? And we both agreed that we need to promote constitutional democracy, train Israelis and Palestinians how to think of it, because we felt that the future would be a one-state solution, and we need to figure out what constitution would look like, etc. We were planning to launch in December 23. October 7 happened, and it became extremely difficult. The Israelis were very traumatized by October 7th. I wasn't able to even talk to Israelis because of the horror they inflicted on my family and others. So we said, let's pause it for a second. And now we are relaunching again with the goal of educating the public in the US. We're no longer talking about constitutional democracy, just in a simple, realistic way on in solutions. We are adopting again the language of two states, despite that it looks unrealistic, because that's what the international consensus is around. We're trying to push the Arab Peace Initiative to say, listen, there is a deal on the table, which is all Arabs would normalize and recognize the state of Israel. If Israel give us 22% of our historical homeland. So that's what we're trying. We are all about a language of peace, not the language of militancy. We are Israelis and Palestinians who believe in the Palestinian rights, and also the Israelis to stay in the land, because it's I think it's a unrealistic fantasy to imagine them just disappear. Yeah. We are all about ending this brutal occupation that is on our land.
Can you say a little bit, a lot of Americans, especially people who are of the Zionist persuasion, say Gaza's not under occupation. Israel withdrew in 2005, gave it back to them, and they look at them, they elected Hamas, and they became terrorists. This proves that the Palestinians, they're just inherently terrorists. What's your response to that?
I mean, two simple things. First of all, Israel doesn't have the right to just withdraw from part of area that is occupied. Let's say one city and then surround it and say we ended the occupation and isolate it from the rest of the Palestinian territories. When the Oslo Agreement was signed with Israel in 1993, part of the agreement that is very clear that the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are one territorial area with supposed to have territorial continuity and connection. So that's the first element that makes Gaza occupied, because Gaza is part of the Palestinian territories. There is no way you can isolate it from it. That's one. Second, Gaza's airspace was always controlled by Israel, even after the withdrawal. So they control it. The electricity in Gaza is controlled by Israel. The fishing area, you cannot really go more than 4 miles or 6 miles, depends on the mood of the Israeli government. It's also controlled by Israel. The borders are all controlled by Israel. You can't get food or clothing or whatever. So all that is an occupation. It's just realistic. But not only that, I'll tell you the last one. The registry of the babies in Gaza is controlled by Israel. What do I mean by that? Have I married an American Christian woman and I went back home to Gaza, if she gave birth to a baby, most likely Israel can decide to register this baby or not as a Palestinian citizen. And I wouldn't have the right to give my American wife a Palestinian citizenship. Why? Because Israel controlled that and they don't want more Palestinian babies, as clear as that, or more Palestinian people with citizenship. So my wife would have to suffer, although she's an American, being treated as really a non-citizen of Palestine, and they wouldn't recognize her American citizenship anyways. All of that is indeed an occupation.
Yeah, I real quick, I read a story the other day I thought was really interesting from 2021 in about farmers, tomato farmers in Gaza. They this is just to show occupation. If this isn't, the perfect example of an occupation, I don't know what is. But at some point in August of 2021, the Israeli government decided that it was going to make all of the tomato farmers in Gaza remove the crown of the tomatoes before they could be shipped out of Gaza. And if you know anything about tomatoes or anything, or gardening, if you remove the crown, the little green thing that attaches it to the stem, it makes it ripen a lot faster. So these farmers were being forced to remove the thing that kept it from over ripening, and then they would have to sit for inspection from Israeli by the IDF 3, 4, 5 days, and then they would all be rotten by the time that they were allowed to actually leave Gaza, and again, so this destroyed the industry of tomato farming in Gaza, because it devastated it. They couldn't get their product out fast enough, and it just kept spoiling, and so almost all of them shut down. And this is 2021, obviously 2 years, but you got to think about something as just arbitrary and ridiculous as that, and it's the way to control every little aspect of their lives. So no, you can't just say like, well, they pulled out. BS. They did not. Clearly, they did not. We can give you 1,000 examples. All right.
And usually the argument Israel uses is that all of that for security, right? Like even the tomato thing is like for security. It's like, come on, guys, really? The tomato are dangerous? I didn't know that. But I give you another example. Then they'll say, well, Gaza is about security, right? It's like there is Hamas, or as they say, Hamas is there. I'm like, okay, so what about the West Bank? I'll give you an example from the West Bank. There is a small Christian beer factory in the West Bank called Taiba, in a town called Taiba. Actually, it's a biblical town that Elijah was passed by there, and that's why it's called Taiba. Taiba means goodness in Arabic, or tasteness in another dialect, the Divinsable dialect. So there is a beer factory, really one of the best IPA beer you can drink. They bring the materials, everything from Germany. The owner is actually a graduate from Harvard Business, really smart Palestinian businessman. He's suffering so much losses because his beer is like intentionally left on the port for like, again, we have to use Israeli port for like months, and it goes bad. And the materials he produces also stays so long. So for example, there is one Arab bar here in DC that bring this beer, Taipei. I always go there to make sure I drink the Palestinian beer, right? Because I like it, and it's great too. It's called Green Zone in Anamoy, and those who are in DC. Oh, yeah. And I always order Taipei when I'm there. So recently I'm like, order Taipei there, and they say, oh, we no longer can bring it. So Israel puts all sort of obstacles in Palestinian businesses. I'll give you another example. Even in the West Bank, if I want to send my family, or a friend in the West Bank, a FedEx shipping, which can reach Israel in 2 days usually, if you pay the expedited one. If I will send something like this in the West Bank, and it's even a document, it can take months because the Israelis will sit it for quote-unquote security screening. I don't know what the hell would be security threat on a paper. Why would it sit on the disk for like months? And the only reason why, they want to make your life so difficult that you would say, why the hell would I go back to Palestine? I just want to leave. And it's very obvious how this works.
And it's effective too.
It's effective. Yeah, my dad left.
There's a reason I'm here. Yeah.
He left. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's miserable. If you can leave, you leave. I mean, we interviewed Shael Ben Ephraim the other day. He's sort of a liberal Zionist. You probably know him from Twitter.
I know him,
and we were talking about this issue, and he, the argument is, well, we have to have the occupation because it's a safety, security issue. Well, I'm sorry, but if people might now act violently towards you because you've oppressed them so much, that's something that sort of you need to deal with now. You have to give people their rights, or they're going to fight back. And it was the same argument that was made about ending slavery. A lot of white slave owners said, like, well, they're going to hate us so much now, we can't let them be free, or they're going to kill all of us. Well, as the slave owners, you're the ones who have to create the conditions where, that aren't oppressive anymore.
The issue too is like, this entire security argument is nonsense. So almost all Israeli generals before that have signed documents saying that continuation of the occupation from a hardcore security point of view is dangerous. Why? It's simple. Because you're moving your citizens to live closer to the Palestinians. So from a logical point of view, if we're so primitive and monsters and so dangerous as they try to portray us, why come and live next to me and create your own settlement, a colony really on my land, and create all these fences around it? Because I'm dangerous and a monster, so I would assume if I'm a monster, you want to go away from me, right? You want to build this nice wall and stay behind a nice wall. But no, they're getting there. And they're saying it themselves. I mean, if you listen to the settlers, no one is talking about security. They're talking about a Messianic Jewish theology that they believe in their mind that God has promised the entire land for them. And then they try to convince Israelis no, that's good for your security. We're there to keep our boots on their necks. Literally, these are the kind of language that the Israelis use in there. So it's just nonsense. And I think that more and more security experts are realizing that this is nonsense. But the issue is that the ideological right in Israel wants this more and more. And the sad part is that this right is becoming, despite that they're still the minority within Israel, becoming more and more prominent with its lobby and the way it's controlling the Israeli government.
Yeah, I mean that's it's unfortunate, and I think the other part I was thinking about the other day about making people miserable or so miserable is that what you actually end up with is that a lot of reasonable people or people who just can't deal with it anymore, they'll leave, and you do get left with a lot of just the hard liners, and those are the people they'll dig in, and so you just kind of create you end up wiping away a lot of the buffer zone of people who are probably more apt or likely to
Yeah.
want to work together, and so it's just
true
self-defeating.
in Israel too. Like I think a
Yeah.
lot of
Oh,
people
yeah.
who are
Yeah.
more reasonable on the Israeli side have
Yeah,
left.
they should
So
realize
you're
it.
left.
Definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, I can tell you on my experience. So I moved in the West Bank. I lived in the West Bank between 2010 to 2021 during COVID.
Oh,
And when you move from the West Bank when you move, excuse me, we'll repeat that. So when you move from Gaza to the West Bank, you're quote unquote considered illegal, although you're still within the boundaries of the
wow.
Palestinian territories. So I moved to the West Bank. All of a sudden, I'm being chased by the Israeli military because I'm illegal. So for 7 years, from 2010 to 2017, I was afraid to move from Bethlehem, where my college is, for example, to Ramallah, where my home is, because there is checkpoint, and they could easily take me to jail and then send me back to Gaza. Then after 7 years, they give me what's called, in Hebrew, it's called Ishur Yehuda B'Shamron. It's the permit to Judea and Samaria to stay there in the West Bank, not in the Israeli part, in the Palestinian part. Still, you need the permit. And it's year-to-year basis, and they renew it. There is no way to apply for the permit. There is no basis for how to get it or not. It's just by chance. You get it or you don't get it. Runs through the computer. So I was lucky. I got it. So this allows you to move in the West Bank freely and to, for example, go to Jordan and come back. Still, you get a very bad treatment because you're from Gaza. I've been beaten by the Israeli military more than 10 times just because I was born in Gaza. They'll stop me, they'll see
Wow.
my ID, throw me on the ground, beat me up, no matter what I say and how nice I am. Many times it happened to me. I moved to the U.S. to get my degree at America, and I did a master in politics, and I was very much involved in peace initiatives in Palestine. So I was bringing Israelis and Palestinians together, talk about nonviolent, all this stuff. So I was like, even by all the standards, I was on the most moderate side, right? Like I believe that we and the Israelis have to live in equality at the end of the day. So I came to the US and I didn't want to stay in the US. I love the US. It's not that I don't like it. It's very nice here. But I wanted to go back to my land to work toward peace. That's just my vision. That's what I believe in. Nonviolent, I have to work for it. So I came, I finished my degree. I tried to go back and they told me, oh no, you don't have a permit anymore. So they revoked my permit that they gave me to live in the West Bank. And they said, you want to go back? Go back to Gaza. And who wants to go back to the hell that's known as the open air prison in Gaza? So I stayed here. So it's not only that the people would feel so bad and they leave. Many times you just leave for 2 years, you study in America, they know in their computer, they know where you went. And they're like, okay, he's in America, cancel it. Let him seek asylum there or whatever. That's literally what they do for you. And after I finished my degree, went back there, wasn't allowed, and then I'm like, where would I stay? Jordan, I can't get residency. In Egypt, it's the same. So I took the first flight, came back to the US.
Wow. Incredible.
It's so. I mean, it just sounds like a bureaucratic hell. Number one, like just oh my. I mean, I'm telling you, I have to go get a real ID at the DMV, and I'm dreading it. Okay, so I cannot imagine dealing with that kind of bureaucracy, like layers and layers and layers. Because I am not, if you can't tell from my Twitter feed, a necessarily patient person.
And it's bureaucracy that's designed to try to make it so you can't
Exactly.
get
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so,
And whenever you go to like Israeli lawyers or something, or like those who are supportive of Israel, they just use the word bureaucratia, which means bureaucracy. That's what it is. I'm like, no, dude, like this is like it's very clear. You could do it. Like I'll give you an example. Because I'm from Gaza, when I used to be allowed back home to the West Bank, they would put me on the bridge. I would like take a straight flight to Amman, Jordan, from New York, let's say, or DC, drive down to the border, which is like 2 hours, and then try to cross. And you have to cross by foot to take a bus and then cross the Jordanian and then go to the Israeli checkpoint. At the Israeli checkpoint, everyone would just pass the Palestinians in like 5 minutes. They'll go through scanning. They would let me for 5 hours sitting on a chair just because I was born in Gaza. So one day I go to the soldier and I tell her, listen, like you kept me for 5 hours. I just took a straight flight from New York. I'm really feeling sick. Can you help me? She looks at me and she said, and I've been sitting here for 7 hours too. I'm not complaining. I told her, well, it's your job you're sitting there.
Yeah.
I took
Yeah.
a flight for 12 hours. She looks at me like that, and then she did nothing. So she said, like, I can't do anything. I need the permission of the Ministry of Interior to let you in. I'm like, okay, I sit back. I really felt more sick. So I went to her. I said, I'm really sick. Can you call the ambulance or let me in? So in 2 minutes, she gave me my passport and stamped it and let me in. So she could, and then I ended up I just passed out while walking, and then the Israeli soldiers had to carry me and like put water on my face, etc.
Oh my
So they kept me 7 hours, no food, uh, um, no nothing, just sitting on a chair, just because, quote unquote, I was born in Gaza. So that's the type of treatment you get, and it's not like only for Gazans, it's for all Palestinians, but literally the system they created. There are hierarchy of goodness. At the very top, Israeli Jews. Right after Israeli citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel. Underneath, the Palestinians from Jerusalem. And underneath that would be Palestinians in the West Bank. And at the very bottom are people like me, people who were born in Gaza and from Gaza.
Wow. And what I think is interesting also is that you are kind of an outspoken critic of Hamas, which I think is really brave. I mean, on the regular, you criticize them and you get so much crap for it. I don't know. I try to like stay out of it. I'm like not really a fan of any governments at all. So, so I don't really like defend Hamas or anything like that. I think like if it were just like normal times, I would probably despise them, like in the way that they run things, right? But I think that you're like super brave. So it's just kind of crazy because it's like you're one of the people that like speaks out against this crap, and yet you're treated just as badly. It doesn't matter. It's not like you get any kind of quote unquote reward for it or anything. You know, you're still seen as just, you know, another Gazan, and you're gonna, you know, commit terror, which is just, again, it goes back to, if you treat people like this, what do you expect them to do? Like, how do you expect them to feel about you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. The last time I was allowed there, and they allowed me to go only for 1 week. They didn't want me to stay, so they allowed me 1 week. It was 23 in January 23, so right after the year started. So I got in for 1 week. I was driving down to Nablus to actually meet Israelis and Palestinians, or meeting there to like talk about peace. We're trying despite all the difficulties. I was attacked by settler terrorists with like really big rocks on my car, my rental car, in front of Israeli military checkpoint. They threw it on my car. I like reversed it. I didn't know what to do. I was so freaking angry. I wanted to get out and like hit the guy. I wanted to do anything, but I've known if I went out of my car, I'll be shot by the Israeli military who were standing there. But the Israeli military were there and they were like looking and laughing. And I was so furious that I wanted to run over the guy. And I'm not a violent person. I was thinking in my mind, I'm like, Khalil, you're a Christian. You're supposed to love your enemy. You're good. You're about peace. And look how much anger you're feeling. So imagine it's just your ordinary Palestinian going through this every day. What kind of reaction he would have? So yeah, that's the reality of what Palestinians are going through. But here's the thing. I really don't think that this is about terror or about security. Matter of fact, I think Israel is more scared of Palestinians who are like myself, who don't like Hamas, who despise Hamas, and who are peaceful than those who would support Hamas and be violent. Why? Because we undermine all their racist arguments. We undermine the idea that Palestinians are those, monsters who wants to kill you. I really don't want to kill no one. I just want my rights. I want to live in peace with the Israelis. That's what I want. I want them to live and be just as equal as I am. I don't want anyone to be better than me, and I don't want anyone to be, and I don't want myself to be better than others. And I think that has been the case, and that's why Hamas ended up being created in the first place, because Israel has suppressed every other alternative and have supported to an extent the Islamists to exist in Gaza and other places, and that's why they came about. All that being said, as you said, I'm still very much critic of Hamas. I think they are the worst thing that ever happened to the Palestinians after the Israeli occupation. They're really strategically bad, ideologically bad, and morally bankrupt, in my opinion.
So, but okay, now to push back on that a little bit, because I know people are going to say, there's a lot of, and I think that there is an argument to be made for armed resistance, right? Because sometimes it just doesn't work. You just can't. People won't speak,
Sure.
and so I think that's, of course, where they end up getting a lot of cover, right? And now you see this kind of like deference or I guess commitment. And I think probably from a lot of people who maybe would have been critical prior to October 7th of Hamas. And now they're like, well, they're the only ones actually doing anything. They're the only ones standing up for us. The whole entire world and all of our quote unquote, diplomacy, and we're supposed to seek peace and everything.
Yeah.
The entire world has just stood by as Israel has committed a genocide, has dropped 120,000 tons of bombs on these people, and there's just this small faction of people who are standing up and trying to fight back. So I definitely sympathize with that as well. Like I can see how people are again drawn to that, and it's very frustrating that those are the only options. Just sit there and do nothing, or you got to join the terrorist organization.
Yeah, no, I think it's a compelling argument. And again, I think that a lot of people in the West are really misinformed on like the history of Palestinian armed resistance. Palestinian armed resistance started way before Hamas by the secularists. Back then, the Islamists, who are the founders of Hamas, Hamas is essentially is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, right? Like the Gaza Hamas is a branch of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, and the West Bank one is branch of the Jordanian. Ahmad Yassin was the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, and he became the founder of Hamas. It's just the history of it. Hamas, or the Muslim Brotherhood, were against armed resistance early in the 80s, and were still meeting with Rabin and with Shimon Peres, and they were criticizing Arafat for using armed resistance. So no, armed resistance goes back much more before Hamas. So my criticism of Hamas has nothing to do really with only their usage of armed resistance. I think armed resistance can be good if it's used at specific time with a specific strategy and specific demands and goals. And again, armored resistance that does not include killing children, for example, women or civilians, which Hamas did, unfortunately, and it's horrific.
Yeah, just to get that on the record, so we're not.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I don't support to kill any civilian or harm any civilian. It's horrible, and that's why I stand against Hamas very strongly, because of their atrocities against civilians. But in addition to that, they are such an ideologues and such like selfish movement that is only interested, I think, in their own self-rule as opposed to the Palestinian interest. I think, from my point of view, what they did on October 7th was strategically a huge mistake. Not because of the attack itself only and the atrocities. Again, the atrocities, we cannot deny that. We cannot even debate it. It happened. It's horrific. But strategically mistaken because it did not read the geopolitical reality in the region. It did not understand that A, none of the Arabs will come to aid you. B, Iran is so weak and Hezbollah is so weak it wouldn't come to aid you. And the third, and I think that the last point too, they didn't understand the Israeli political reality. I mean, Hamas talks always about how mastermind was Sinwar, and he really understood the Israelis. He did not understand shit. He didn't understand that this is a government that came on the promise that we want a war with the Palestinians. They're saying it. Smotrich published a paper in 2018 saying it's called Decisive Plan, in which he says, I hope for a war with the Palestinians so we can ethnic cleansing them. So if this is a government that wants war to ethnic cleanse you, to carry a genocide, you go like, hey, October 7th, it's like a gift to them. So that's the first, that's a huge mistake. And then they carried through like nothing happened. 60,000 people are dead in Gaza. 200,000 people that were injured. A lot of them are amputated kids that will grow up there. The elites of Gaza are leaving and immigrating when they can pay and go. So Gaza will end up with the most miserable people there living in tents. And I think that this is a recipe for disaster for the future. Now, here's what people tell me to that, Mel, that after October 7th, we woke up. Some guy in North Carolina or some guy in New York woke up, and especially the Brooklyn dudes in the left, they woke up and this is good. I look at them and I cannot be more furious because you woke up, but my family were killed and my city is ruined, and we are not closer to liberation that we were closer before. Rather, we are closer to annihilation. So I think it's a very self-centered argument that, oh, we woke up, that's October 7th is good. No, it ruined Gaza. we're not closer to liberation. Now, have we liberated few meters from Palestine? Even we lost land in Gaza, actually. Have we liberated some? I would be like, okay, maybe it's horrible and still there are atrocities, but maybe I'd say that this is the price of freedom. But we're farther from freedom and closer to annihilation that we ever been since 1948. That's the unfortunate reality, and we gotta reckon with this reality in order to find strategy out of this.
Yeah.
When you and I were talking the other day about how frustrated we are with the left and how they say, like, I think they really turn off Americans who don't know much or who are on the fence or who might otherwise sympathize with the Palestinian cause. But it's framed as, the left tends to frame it ridiculously. They tend to like be so extreme in their purity tests. It's annoyed me to no end how they've reacted to no other land. Like a lot of them are now calling for boycotts. I'm like, Palestinian suffering got 2 minutes at the Oscars. Like, be happy that the whole world heard about this for 2 minutes. It's to talk about, it's not enough intersectionality and this and this and this. I mean, come on. Like, the reality is that babies are starving to death. Israel might very soon resume its bombing. We need immediate change in U.S. policy here. So I don't know. So how do you see kind of perhaps going forward how we can appeal more to the right?
To start with, let's diagnose what's happening on the left in regard to Palestine in order to understand how not to be like them. I think there are two problems with the left on these issues. One, that there's a segment on the left that actually hate America. Like, they look at America and they go like, America and Israel are the same thing, right? Like, they're both settler colonial countries, and thus we have to like somehow hate both. I look at America and Israel and I say America's great. If Israel was like America, we would not have conflict because everyone is treated equally, at least on laws, and that's great. If Israel would become like America, regardless of the both settler colonial history. I mean, Australia is settler colonial too, so is America and Canada, but they're great nations. If Israel becomes like America, I think we wouldn't have conflict. It wouldn't be Israel anymore. It wouldn't be a Jewish state anymore. So that's the first problem, I think, in there. They misunderstand.
Can I just push back a little bit on that? And I'm not someone who, I don't hate America. I'm very proud to be an American citizen. I think there are lots of great things about this country. I do think that we treat the lives of people in other countries, our government, not individuals, with a lot of disregard. If they're in Iraq or Afghanistan or various other countries, lots of South American countries, there's a lot of carelessness, and so I think that actually creates a lot of anger. So I love a lot of our fundamental principles, and I think a lot of the people in America are great. I don't like a lot of what the government does.
Absolutely. And again, to be very specific, I'm talking domestically here. So when we talk about the settler colonial, there is no I'm not aware of any theories that talk about violence of settler colonial abroad. It's more about inside, right? What happened to the indigenous Americans, which obviously was horrific, to black people, etc. today. So I'm talking about within the boundaries. If Israel and America are compared, there's no way to compare both. Now, American foreign policy is miserable. It's terrible. I don't condone it. I don't support it. It's horrific. The second thing is this whole woke idea. And I mean, there's so much ink that was written about wokeness, some of which I think is worth reading. Others is just like really a right-wing critiques that I don't think are sensible. But I think some of it is true. And I think in the main issue what happened to Palestine with wokeness is that cancel culture has gotten so much in there, and like the fact that anyone who disagree with us, even in one point of strategy, he's canceled. He's an ethnocentric racist, as someone said. Someone actually, a Palestinian, quote unquote, he considered himself an intellectual, wrote the other week, if you criticize Hamas, how they treated the babies hostages, you're an ethnocentric racist. I'm like, dude, this, we're not in 2018 anymore. No one accuses everyone of being racist. And certainly if you criticize Hamas, you're not racist. That's the first thing. The second thing is the entire intersectionality. It makes me confused, to be honest. Now, I am aware, for example, that the first concept of intersectionality is not a bad thing, by the way. For example, it says that as a Palestinian, you're experiencing oppression at certain level because you're Palestinians. That is true. As a Palestinian Christian, you're experiencing two oppressions, as a Christian and as a Palestinian. And that is true because Christians are also experiencing oppression from Islamists. But then they take it so far to that as someone from these intersectional oppressed groups, whatever, you have to feel with everyone. For example, if you're a Muslim conservative who don't believe in the rights of transgenders, for example, all of a sudden you have to be canceled, right? If you're someone like me who consider himself socially conservative, right, like believes in like values of family, marriage, church, God, etc., then all of a sudden you have to also be canceled. These two things, I think, the most root things about this movement, from my point of view. First, equating America with Israel fully. You can criticize their foreign policy, but to hate the nation itself, I think it's not smart. The second thing is that you've got to be broader than that. Don't be about the intersectionality, be about solidarity. If you're a conservative and you love Trump and you stand against the horrible foreign policy of America, be my friend, be my guest. Why no? So that's, I think, what needs to happen. Um, we can talk more about, I don't know how much deep you want to go into this, but I think there is a lot to be said also about the language used, and the turns of a lot of conservatives about how you brand your own issue, whether it's a social issue or it's social justice issue, it's a property issue, it's a national issue. All sort of conversation to be had about this.
Yeah, something I see the left do very often is they'll attach ideology. A lot of it is rooted in like Marxism, Leninism, but they'll find a people struggling with a plight, and of course there's hardly one that's more, I think, compelling in a lot of ways than the Palestinian plight, right? I mean, it's kind of got it all, right? It's got oppression, it's got brutality, tyranny, and all of the things. And so they'll attach themselves to that and then kind of use that. I don't want to say like skinwalking, but you know what I'm saying. Use that as a mechanism to push forward in their own messaging all the time. And we saw even with you see it with the gay rights, and it's, I mean, like my brother is gay. And so I've seen he had, when we were growing up, like kids, I mean, people were really mean to him. He experienced a lot of really rough things. It's not like that didn't happen. And then, so once, they fight for that. Now we've attached ourselves to like the trans rights, because again, there are people, whether you believe in that stuff or not, there are certainly people that have had some pretty horrific experiences in their lives as that. And so now we've become a champion of that. Does that make sense? So you just kind of see them moving from cause to cause and using that cause as a way to further their own message. And not all, but for a lot, I think it's actually not really about Palestinians at all. It's just about this is a means for us to move our own messaging forward. And so unfortunately you see, and that's when you see obviously a lot of just, okay, well, most Palestinians, most Muslims are pretty conservative actually. So it's kind of weird to see that trans flag flying,
Yeah, but I think here's the issue. Even before all of that too, the way through which the sort of Marxist and like even Soviet back then alliance with the Palestinians happened, it was in part of it is because of American foreign policy, right? America has supported the Israeli brutality against the Palestinians so much that Palestinians has to switch sides and stand with the Soviets. Why do I say switch sides? Because before 48, you'd find so much Palestinian literature that is quite pro-American. And I'll quote one for you. One of my favorite writers is Khalil Sayegh. Was a Christian Orthodox writer that lived in Jerusalem. Actually was arrested by the Ottomans in early 1914, I think, or before 13, I'm not sure. Was arrested because he's a Palestinian nationalist and stood against the Ottomans. Was a Christian, was all about equality between everyone. And he wrote the following in one of his diaries that I really like a lot. And he says that I cannot trust the French to liberate us and stand against the Zionist greed on here. I cannot trust the British to do it because they are imperialists too, like the French. There's only one nation I can trust, and it's the United States of America. And the reasoning, he says, because it's not imperialist, and back then it wasn't. It became later, right? And it's not about occupying others, and it's never done so far. And he ends with that, right? Now, this is before 48. He wrote it early in the 30s. Back then, America did not have a clear stance with the Zionists. It wasn't, And after the 40s, I don't know how Khalil's thinking changed after the 40s because he died in the 50s. I believe. But this is the kind of literature you'd find in the Middle East. People were really looking up to like America. Wilson was really like really beloved among a lot of intellectuals in the region. But America has taken such a stand that the Palestinians didn't find themselves in alliance with the Marxists and with the others on the left. But here's the reality. So the left tells me all the time that, you know, the entire struggle is about capitalism. It's about this and that. It's about how capitalism sucks. Well, in 1948, Israel was socialist. I hate to break it down to you. I mean, again, capitalism is not perfect. It's not my gospel. I have one gospel, and it's the gospel of Christ. But it's not gospel. And Israel was a socialist, and it confiscated our property, etc. And it wasn't until up in the 80s, until this, you know, more like liberal, quote unquote, I mean, economically liberal, Likudist party, which is really the liberal economically, came to power. But before that, they were all socialist, and they weren't really great people. They were very bad toward the Palestinians. So the argument, it gets really, even if it has some merits to a certain extent, it becomes an obstacle for a lot of people on the right to adhere to them. So I always tell my people, like when I explain to my friends who are conservative, and I go to church that is conservative, so these are part of my community. They're my brothers and sisters. I always tell them about what happened to my family in 1948 only from the lens of private property. Forget the national rights too. Mm-hmm. And it's really appealing to them. So why can't we speak in this language? Why can't we speak in the language of nationalism too? Because what happened to Palestine, the Palestinian cause is, as much as it's about social justice, it's about a nation too, that was stripped from its national right.
Yeah, that's what I always say. It's the most, to me, it's the most compelling argument. And of course, being a conservative, being, you know, highly valuing nationalism and private property. I mean, private property is pretty much sacrosanct among most conservatives, or so they claim. And so I think, why would this not be an appealing argument to you? You know, just as someone comes in and they say, okay, your home is mine now, and they kick your family out, and you don't get compensated for it, and you're supposed to apparently just get over it, just suck it up and say, oh, you know, all of these guys flying all these Gadsden flags, you know, don't tread on me. Yeah, I bet that would go over real well with y'all, wouldn't it? You know, so.
Yeah. I was arguing with some guy on Twitter about this about like 6 months ago, and I was talking about how some of my family's land was taken, and he was like, you know, he was super conservative, and he was like, well, just get over it. They should just get over it. People lose their. I'm like, I have a feeling you would not feel that way if it was you. He just dug himself in, and he didn't want to admit.
And here's the issue too. It's like, get over it if it just happened and it's not happening again, but it's happening over and over. They're taking more land. It's ridiculous, because the whole concept that we believe in, at least the Palestinians recognize, of two-state solution is a concept of compromise. Israel is treated now as if it's like, oh, it's compromise for the Israelis. It's actually not. It's a compromise from us. We're telling you, take our land, take 78% of our land, and give us just 22% of our land. And now they're going like, no, this is a land also God promised for us, and we have to take it from you. And you're gonna be grateful that we are even letting you live there as like what, fifth status citizen or something. Not citizen even, just like without citizenship.
Subjects.
Yeah. Serfs.
Yeah. So I mean, definitely, there's so much room, I think, to be had, and you see it waking up, quote unquote, on the right. I mean, it's going a little crazy right now these past 2 days, and I don't know. It's a little funny for me, like having been on this side for a long time and always kind of having had these, you know, since 2010, since the flotilla raid. I've been watching. I've been very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but you know, I never really. I mean, I always like spoke out against it. I've always been a little critical of Israel, but nothing like I am now. Now I'm just like obsessed. People accuse me of being obsessed all the time. I'm like, but the problem is that I don't want to say like it all leads back to Israel, but all of our policies are in some way, shape, or form connected or influenced by this massive lobby. And it's extremely difficult for me to focus on any of our other priorities, because I continuously see things that I care about being, you know, sacrificed in order to further the cause of the Israeli lobby, right? And we see this over and over again.
There are some really scary things happening this week. So just to update people who may not be paying attention, they're really cracking down. The Trump administration is really cracking down on college campuses. They just said they're withdrawing $400 million in funds from Colombia for not adequately cracking down on anti-Semitic speech.
They just said that today?
This just happened. You can have a problem with federal funding of colleges, and that's a different subject, but if you're conditioning the funding on cracking down on this speech, and at the same time they're hosting Naftali Bennett, which I'm fine with, but they're also going to silence the pro-Palestine students. And there was just an article that came out like 2 hours ago about a girl who wrote an essay about Palestine and said she's being investigated for that. Huge chilling effect. And then the State Department says that they're surveying social media accounts of non-citizens to deport them if they support Hamas, which again is like super vague. There are like a thousand arguments I can think of for why this is a bad idea. Like you're kind of looking at thought crimes. What does it mean to support Hamas? Yeah. If you say Palestinians have a right to resist, is that enough? Why should Israeli people get to support Israel's assault on Gaza, but Palestinians can't? I mean, I don't support what happened on October 7th, but the idea the government's going to start punishing people for having thoughts and ideas, like this is exactly what the First Amendment is supposed to protect. So our rights are being thrown in the toilet for this government and this crazy genocidal state, and that should trouble all Americans.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, I just don't buy it that this is all a bunch of foreign citizens. They're just not. All right, these are American citizens. Yep. If you've ever actually been around people who, it's funny. At the college I went to, we had a lot of Chinese nationals, and they're on student visas, and I don't know. At least my experience, they wouldn't even jaywalk at the thought of like, oh my gosh, I might get sent. I could get, if I got a ticket, I would get in trouble. So the idea that they're like out there, causing all this ruckus is just ridiculous. I just feel like the only people saying that are people who have either are just purposely trying to mislead, or you've just never been around anyone here on a student visa. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's that. And we have material support of terrorism laws. If people have provided material support for terrorism, like financial or some other kind of actual assistance, you can prosecute them and you can deport them. So this is clearly about getting at ideas and speech. And apparently they've already found a student to deport. So I'll be keeping my eye on that. But
and don't you think it's going to be just so shameful, though, that if we start sending students back to, say, I don't know, China, right? And say we're sending them back because they opposed the genocide in Gaza. What kind of message does that send to the Chinese about America? You got to think about the messaging that deporting these citizens, especially if it's for something really petty, like they wrote a BDS article, what is that the message that we're sending to the rest of the world, right? Clearly, we're not some kind of beacon of free speech. Clearly, we don't uphold the values that we claim to, and yet we're going to start lecturing the Chinese about the Uyghurs, which I think most of that's already gone out the window to begin with. But I just think it's pretty rich, the hypocrisy or whatnot and the message that it's going to be sending. And what, again, it's not even like they're here insulting us. They are literally just insulting a foreign country. We shouldn't even really care, to be quite honest with you. And yet, apparently, that's the number one priority. It's clearly been the number one priority of this administration right now. We've got the State Department going, balls to the wall with the AI scans. We've got the Department of Justice opening up investigations now at, It's UCLA, Columbia, Harvard, Yale. So again, people say, oh, you're obsessed. I'm like, am I obsessed? Really? Is it me that's obsessed? Or is it that I'm just literally running around playing whack-a-mole with the whole government that's obsessed? Sorry. Okay.
Well, I could keep talking about this, but unfortunately I forgot that I have someone coming over too.
So that's great. Thank you so much.
Any final words, and also tell people where they can find you?
sorry. I messed up. Sorry, I'll say. Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been great conversation. You can find me at Twitter at Khalil at Jurius. That I don't know how people put the name or how does it work. So I have to
Yeah, if
repeat
you put
that.
your
So-
name,
Well, like
they can-
I'll
yeah.
tag you. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tag you
okay.
in.
Okay, so
Great.
I repeat
Yeah,
the same
well,
thing.
thank
or
you
no?
so much for joining.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye bye.